cashless society is a sort of a euphemism for saying the bank payment society. It's a society where you move money around essentially through bank accounts. So one of the immediate players that drives it are the banks themselves, who stand to gain from a move to cashless society in the sense that you will always have to use the banking infrastructure. But then there's also all the companies that work around the banks, like the payments companies like Visa and MasterCard, who facilitate the movement of money between bank accounts. Then there's the fintech industry more generally, or the financial technology industry, who often then builds more services on top of it. So you can imagine these layers of the digital financial ecosystem. There's the banks, who are the sort of underlying layer, then there's the payments companies and the fintech companies that are built on top of that. And all of them have agendas in pushing for cashless society because cash represents a form of payment that they don't make any fees from. Then governments are also pushing for it because you can monitor what goes on between bank accounts a lot more easily than you can monitor cash transactions. So there's a bunch of government agendas around being able to essentially have greater levels of surveillance upon society, but also to, there's monetary policy agendas that the government has by being able to control the money supply more easily. Those are the main players pushing for it right now. What the technology industry often will do is to speak about a future that they would like to see and present it as being completely inevitable and obvious that it will happen. All right, so a lot of the sort of tech futurism is really the sort of desires of technology companies projected out as being obvious things that will supposedly will happen. So when people are saying, we're inevitably moving towards a cashless society, we're inevitably going to this, it's largely the marketing departments of the financial technology companies that are trying to create this sense that this was what you want, right? So, and this is why the companies like Visa, for example, will be running all their adverts all the time in London saying, cash-free and proud. They're trying to engineer this feeling that there's something wrong with cash. I mean, cash is a public utility, right? Anybody can use it. There's no requirement to be interacting with a private company in order to be using cash. Whereas private companies have to advertise and make themselves desirable, which is why they're on this kind of offensive against cash, on private payments companies. But yes, the financial technology industry more generally has a lot of agendas in trying to tell us that there's this inevitable automation and digitalization of finance. FinTech is a sector which stands for financial technology. Basically, FinTech is the automation of finance. I mean, that's what the financial technology industry does, and there's sort of two big sections to FinTech. One is trying to automate the jobs of financial professionals. So, take something that previously a banker would have had to do manually, and just automate it. So, for example, automating a loan decision-making process. So rather than a banker actually deciding whether a loan is going to be granted, just have it through some algorithm that decides. That's an example of a type of a fintech innovation, and it's the automation of a financial professional. The other sort of section of that is the automation of the user experience layer of finance. So that's the kind of like front end, how the branches, the places where you go and interact with the financial sector. So they will try to replace a branch with a phone app, or try to replace any kind of analog form with some kind of automated digital form. So the end goal of the financial technology sector is to automate both the financial professionals and how you interact with them. And that's what they would call digital banking, digital finance, digital payments, and they all kind of interact together to create, that's the fintech sector. I mean, I don't know, there's always political issues in finance. I mean, there's always like the immediate, like day-to-day stuff, which is like, I don't know what it is. I don't follow what's going on day-to-day in the financial markets because it's, I'm imagining right now the biggest political issues was probably something to do with Brexit or something. But like long term, the biggest political issues that will never be spoken about in political forums will be stuff like the ongoing kind of enclosure of our lives by the financial sector, and with that, the digital technology sector. So the big kind of scary stuff right now is the fact that most corporations, but financial corporations, are getting ever increasing amounts of data about people. And they're starting to be able to fine-tune profiles about people, and they're perfecting their methodologies for how you both understand people and then subsequently with that be able to manipulate them in various ways or present paths to them. If you were thinking about, like, you watch these science fiction films and you were wondering, like, how would we make this a reality? So something like Minority Report, for example. The way you would make it a reality is that you would integrate the financial sector with all the technology companies. You would basically make these seamless processes whereby, you walk into a room and it triggers like some biometric thing by recognizing your face, and it automatically triggers a payment through the payment system of the banks, or these kind of like automated exchange systems, which rely upon the banking sector to actually complete. Without that, you don't have those purely automated societies. So that's like super long-term science fiction dystopia stuff, but that's actively what the financial sector is slowly working towards. So I kind of think a lot about that right now. But in the meantime, there's all the normal shit, there's all the kind of like offshore finance and, speculation and hedge funds doing whatever they want to do and that kind of thing, which is also obviously very important. The general modus operandi of the technology sector more generally, not only the financial technology sector, is that you fixate upon short-term problems, or you artificially create short-term problems, or else fixate upon kind of banal short-term problems, and you sell stuff like that to people. You say, I sell you a solution to your short-term problem. But what we'll never tell you about is the long-term consequences of all of you using our short-term solution. Which is because you can't sell long-term consequences. So think about the standard startup pitch format. If you ever go to any startup pitching contest, they always have this format, which is like, I've identified a problem. Here's my solution for the problem, and here's how you monetize the solution, right? And here's how you market this to people. This is what you tell them, the short-term use value of this thing, right? And that's the only thing that a venture capitalist is going to back, because that's the only thing you can sell in the short term, right? And so there's this whole sort of structure of capitalism which involves having to pitch short-term solutions. At an individual level, that might be fine, but when you start to like zoom out and you look at the collective effects of these things, you'll find people being locked into gigantic sort of systems that they do not understand. Our mobile phones are a very good example of this. These would be pitched as being, useful things, which they are, but it's like, oh, by the way, we also created like a huge surveillance system to track every moment of your life in the process of offering you these useful things. We didn't really mention that in any of the startups that created this type of technology. So that's the big problem that you'll find. And there's no economic incentives for people to ever tell you what the implications of the technology are. So there's a chronic sort of problem in technology ethics right now, where startup entrepreneurs are rewarded for their individual successes, but are never asked to take responsibility for the collective consequences of all of their technology put together. And that's been going on for a long time. So, and the problem is, if you're trying to market to people as well, it's very easy to market to someone who's like short-term convenience. It sort of plays into your people's kind of most petty sides. It's like, okay, you make something slightly easier. You can kind of sell something on that basis. But if you ever want to try and tap into people's more, humane sides, their noble sides, their kind of like sense, they're much more deeper selves. You can't really sell it, right? It's much harder to sell. So, but you can sell short-term like laziness. So that's in general what the technology sector specializes in. But there's some cool stuff you can do with technology too. I'm not like totally against it. I'm just like, sick of the overwhelmingly sickly sweet kind of insipid optimism around technology.